Perspectives, Finding Common Ground, a podcast series that brings together a panel of thought leader perspectives as a forum to socialize and problem solve education technology issues with the goal to ultimately find common ground.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Joining you all live today from the IMS conference in Nashville, Tennessee, and doing both a session during the conference and a broadcast for Perspectives, Finding Common Ground, podcast that ClassLink sponsors around ed tech. We have three different perspectives on a topic, and the objective of the podcast is to kind of find some common ground or common understanding about the topic, which is perfectly appropriate for the conversation that we're having here today at IMS. Topic is a little more in the weeds than we normally do. It's around the resources component of OneRoster and using it for provisioning accounts with greater detail within a publisher's environment. So we want to dive into that a little bit. We have three great guests with us here today. To start with, my name is Patrick Devaney. I'm the Vice President of Strategy and Partnerships at ClassLink. My role primarily is to oversee the network of companies that ClassLink integrates with, bringing them on and then managing the relationships with them and improving services through those relationships over time. With us, we have Casey Carroll, who is the Senior Product Manager for Bedford. It's McMillan, but it's BFW.
BFW in the K-12 space.
In the K-12 space, right? Names are a little bit different. We also have Emily Bell from Fulton County. She's the CIO at Fulton County Schools in Georgia. And Mark Nelson is the Vice President of Product at Savas. I think I got all those correct. So thank you all for joining us here today. We'd like to start with just a couple of moments from each of you talking about your experience with resources, how you use them, where you've seen the resources component of the rostering service. Where you've seen them, how you use them, just a light perspective on your interface with those. And I guess we could start with you, Casey, if that's okay.
Yeah. BFW, we're largely published in the AP space in the K-12 market. And we have two platforms, Launchpad and Sapling, that we use. And we have multiple titles on each of those platforms. And so what we do is to ensure that the resources are getting mapped to the right course. We utilize the resources file, give you the titles that are in use and allow you to map that to the right resource ID. And we also utilize either a course resource file or a class resource file, depending on how you want to break out your classes, whether by a teacher and all their sections together or have a class for every individual section. So it gives the district, I think, two things. It gives them more visibility into what's going on, so you're not relying on needing to contact BFW to see if there's an issue with one of your files. And it also gives you somewhat of a bespoke experience. If you have teachers who want individual sections, you can actually kind of break out your courses into classes, into sections, or kind of rolled up courses as well. So it hopefully gives you a more robust experience and be a little more responsive to what your teachers' needs are in terms of breaking up their digital courses.
Emily?
Okay, as the only school district on the panel, certainly we're a customer of ClassLink, and we are using primarily the sharing, that the development that ClassLink does with the vendors, and the rostering happens as a result of that. For the most part, the rostering is successful for our teachers, but we do have those granular situations. Like you said, they want specific sections or they want something a little different, and we have to kind of go back and forth. Would love for that to already be as granular as possible so that there would be, less interaction with making that happen, but that's our current state today.
Yeah, it's super helpful to have as much information in the exchange and the fostering process as possible. And that does place burdens on folks, of providing all that detail up front, particularly in large districts with scale. But we're rostering we support 3,700 integrations across about 12 million kids and all their relationships to their teachers, their classes, and their products. The products are in multiple languages. They've got cryptic titles. It's been assigned. Maybe you're new. Maybe you're subbing. All the things that that you may not have the pieces of information to know how to associate your product with class. So resources and of course all the detail that we can get in those exchanges really helps fidelity of implementation. So to the degree that we can get all of that, then it's great. And otherwise, we step in and help our customers make that last mile connection with their product.
Great, thank you. So there's some benefits in having this, but let's talk a little bit about implementing it and some of the are there challenges that you've encountered, some things that are particularly difficult, or modifications to how you have been using it that you think might be helpful? And I guess we'll start with you again, Casey. You just happen to be sitting next to me.
Yeah.
You're the victim. You're close.
Well, this will be our third year working with ClassLink, so we're maybe still a little new to this experience. And what we have found is that there are a lot of other ed tech vendors that don't require the resources file or the course resources file. So we end up having a lot more conversations about why right at the beginning of an implementation. And so our experience, our courses are, especially since they're primarily in the AP market, there's a real concept of having a course for an individual teacher as opposed to having maybe just rostering into a general website where a student can maybe find a code to find their teacher or something like that. Each teacher has their own individual course space and have a lot of ability to kind of build out the pedagogy within that course in a way that's consistent with what they want their experience to be. And in some ways, I think it's a good model because that's how most higher ed courseware is too. So for a lot of students leaving high school, especially those in the AP market, they're about to enter a new digital geography when they go to college as well. So having that individual course space is important. And I think once we explain it, and then the teachers I think they often reinforce the concept as well. It becomes easier after that. But I think that first initial hurdle is why do we need to share a resources file? Why do we need to share a course resources file? So it's us needing to explain our rationale and why we need it. So,
well, yeah, and that brings up a point. Why don't we talk a little bit about what the process is? You have to produce a list of the resources that are specific to the customer that you're working with, provide that to them, and then they have to do the mappings between each individual resource and the course or class that they should be available for. Correct?
That's correct. Yeah, we provide a template of a resources file. And then the district then has to generate or put a resource sourced ID onto that. Oftentimes we see them just copy what our ID as well is and just use that as a resource sourced ID. And then take that and map that resource sourced ID to the courses that they're needed so that the course has the proper resource as well. And after that, it's really easy.
Well, so why don't we, if you don't mind, Emily, Mark, why don't you share a little bit of how at Savas you do that? What's the process to implement these?
So we do, first of all, when we bring on a new integration, we go through a discovery process, right? So we connect the district administrator or whoever's the person, the point person's in charge there with somebody from our discovery team. The discovery team on our side has all of the transaction information, what the products are that have been purchased. And then of course the district has the other piece of information, and that's how they're allocated. You would think in K-12, well, first grade, you've got first grade math. And so first grade math goes to first grade, and it not really so much, right? So you might have multiple grade levels in a classroom. You might have multiple products from grade levels. The product might not have a grade on it. It might not have grade level in the title. There's Spanish and English versions. There's other language versions. For whatever reason, when we title things, we just decide to do whatever. So the titles may not make sense to you, right? So you have the discovery process helps connect those things, right? And then once you've gone through first year, a lot of people, most buys are longer than a year. So, a little smoother the next year. But right now, transientness with student population as well as teachers and availability of teachers and resources there's a lot that goes on, and so the resource files and that part of OneRoster is absolutely fabulous, particularly in large districts at scale. But it is challenging to implement, and it's challenging to maintain. However, without it, each individual teacher gets rostered into our system. They have to make those choices. They have to set up their own classes, and that puts a barrier between students and the products that they need to start teaching and learning. So I mean, that's how we do it.
And so, Emily, now on the customer side of things, it sounds to me like it's fairly complicated, and there's benefits in doing it, but how big a burden is it? And I think also what portion of, if you have any sense of what portion of publishers are using the resources component today?
I don't really have a sense for how many of our publishers are using the resource component, but I will comment on those of you who are in districts can probably relate to this comment. When we're talking about mapping course numbers to specific resources, now you're outside of the scope of the IT division and my integrations team. So my integration specialists are that. They work on integrating the data or in this case, the resources, but we can't necessarily know or understand what maps to what.
Mm-hmm.
So we must connect with our partners in academics who often think we should know.
Yeah.
Just do it and do that easy button thing, and just magically make all of that happen just the way we want it. So it's a constant. We're working with you guys. We're also working with academics. So that often creates a pain point there. But like you said, most of the time we keep our vendor partners for more than 1 year. So always the first year is bumpy, and then it gets better.
That's exactly what we expected to hear, honestly, is that there's different people in the district that have to be associated with this. And that's a big part of the challenge. And now when you start to actually have to share files and look up in different areas, and it's not just one person in the academic side of things, it's probably different people for different subjects and different, maybe even different groupings or classes within each subject. So given that, what are there any ideas around what could change to make it easier? What would, if there was a way to engage the academic folks or a way to streamline this process at all? You guys have all been part of it. We'd love to hear ideas because we'd like
I'd like to start that answer by saying that oftentimes the IT division is brought in after the actual resource is contracted, is provisioned, or it is purchased. So we would like to be at the table. I think that it only makes sense to understand, why are we buying this and what is going to be the purpose and what's our target audiences up front. So I know I'm kind of, for those of you in school district, again, preaching to the choir, because I know all of you relate to that. So that would be better, but that's internal, right? That has nothing to do with our vendor partners or what ClassLink does. That is all an internal process. But just look at this conference that we're at today, and we're doing the podcast live here. I would love to know how many curriculum people are here.
Sure.
We need more curriculum people here.
Yeah.
We need to work alongside curriculum and technology. LaTanya McDade was one of the keynote or panel speakers at the beginning of the conference, and she talked about how technology comes behind and really supports. I love her. I love what she's saying, as she's done amazing work in Chicago, and now she'll do the same thing in Connecticut. But I think that technology should come alongside of curriculum for these very specific reasons.
Fantastic. I couldn't agree more. Any thoughts on that case?
No, I thought that was well stated. I was thinking, I'm sorry, I couldn't remember the woman's name, but yesterday's general session, when they were discussing what the next 5 years are, the panelists from Oracle was talking about how you're no longer you don't have to be in front of a computer for something to be happening. That things can be happening on the back end too. And I think what you're talking about is exactly that, like where you're thinking ahead of time, and there's ways to kind of bring everything together organically and maybe systemically, so that curriculum information is being fed to y'all at the same time. That's a long way of saying.
And when we're at the table, we're able to inform best practice of what's happened in the past.
Yeah.
How have we been able to fast track integrations because of the lessons we've learned?
I think that's great. Mark, do you have any?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree. I think that, we partner with a wide range of districts. Our market segments go from very large urban districts to very rural districts that don't have IT support. So within that range, depending on the complexity, we certainly are seeing more IT presence up front during the purchase process than we've ever seen before. Part of that's data privacy and security regulations and other reasons that are bringing them to the table. I've worked with large districts where the IT department sees the curriculum department as their customer, and providing services. And so I've seen different relationships. But absolutely, if they're not present, then we're missing that piece. If I'm doing discovery with just the curriculum department or just the IT department, then I'm not going to have all the information that I need to make sure the product ends up in the class, with the appropriate teacher. So I think you're right. That connection is absolutely essential.
And I think that there's also solving the problem takes energy to fix it, but that the required energy grows exponentially when you have to redo and go back and restart the process, reorient people to the process, versus if they were all side by side right from the beginning. It's going to be a much more efficient approach. ClassLink tries to facilitate some of those conversations. We have a back to school summit, and we bring together vendors or providers and school districts to have collaborative discussions about that, to try to find new and different ways to solve it. So in this particular scenario, engaging the curriculum folks in the purchasing process might help. If they actually did that mapping right up front. We think there may be some technology, and I'll throw this out. I don't want to make this about ClassLink, but we've had some ideas around the rostering and resources process for a while. And in our environment, the thought is, if a provider or vendor could upload the available options for each customer through their interface into ClassLink, and then the customer would receive that list of resources, the administrator then could assign it as part of a workflow to different curriculum staff to actually do those alignments or those mappings. Because in the roster server, you got all the courses, you got all the classes, so they could actually go in and do a drag and drop kind of an alignment to simplify the process. Does that solve some of the challenge here? Would that help?
It seems logical. I think that drag and drop would resonate with just about any end user, curriculum, IT. Make it easy for all of us. That sounds good to me.
Well, there's a little bit of a selfish motive here, because we're wanting to see if that makes sense, if it's something that others would be interested in as well. There's also the concept that resources doesn't just have to be titles, but it could be used in other provisioning aspects. Have you done any of that, either Mark or Casey, beyond the specific titles or language or whatever? You've talked about a bunch of those variations. Do you see that beyond just the titles, that a place to use for additional refinement or granularity in the assignments?
Yeah, I would. I mean, for me, I would say again, access to your product is job one, right? So you have to be rostered, right? K-12 is so unique in the sense that as a vendor, as a provider of core curriculum, I can't know my final customer. I can't know anything about that person, right? I'm dependent on the district for providing as much information as possible. As we move forward, as the rostering gets more sophisticated, as vendors provide UIs for us to see all the pieces and parts and make those connections, I think it just ends up being a better experience for teachers and learners.
Mhm.
So, so I think that's why we contribute here. That's why we provide those services in the field. That's why we partner with people like ClassLink, is we see the clear benefit of as much information as we can have to make sure that access is there and available day one, and that it's correct, and that it's consistent, and that it's secure. That's literally, what our mission is, right? And so because at the end of the day, you want teaching and learning to be as seamless as possible and take out as many barriers as we can. And the larger, more complicated the district, the more products that are there, the more students, the diversity of the student population, the harder these problems become to solve. But I think, coming together and working on them is the right thing.
Yeah, I'd like to see where, we can expand what we're doing in any of these specs here. But I think Mark really hit it. This is with digital kind of exploding as well in the K-12 market. I mean, that's now a digital geography that they have to master. And then one thing that ClassLink's SSO and rostering solutions and other companies out there trying to kind of rethink the space, like just knowing where to go to access that information, not having to remember usernames and passwords. It's so simple. It's the core of everything that's going on here. But when you're talking about a student who's trying to learn as much as they can in a very short period of time, the idea that you don't have to really navigate a new space for every single class that you're in is important.
Cool. I think I'd like to open it up. We've got a fair number of folks here, both providers and customers or districts. Anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask or bring up here? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, going back to resources, so we have two scenarios that we find interesting. So we have customers who use Safari Montage, running off different repository. And what you can do in there is you can build a course outline, tie that to standards, and then have playlists for each of those units or topics that you're teaching. And then what we're seeing with our campus and Schoology integrations is the district building out the courses or the lessons and making that available for teachers to copy and bring into their own courses.
So your thought there is to use the resources to actually use those playlists, assign those playlists, or the constructed course, the customized course. Great.
So as Henry had, they built their own in conjunction with Safari Montage company of people that. But anyway, what they did is they have the case standards, which then map to the different topics, and within that topic there's an outline, and then you have all the resources that are then stored in Safari Montage.
Fantastic. Neat implementation.
That is really interesting. Yeah.
We do the same thing at Fulton County Schools, and Safari Montage is on the back side. And the teachers are able to pull that content that is standards aligned into Microsoft Teams. That's our platform for collaboration and productivity. So it's great. We don't have everything there yet. So if it's publisher content,
Right.
the teachers may be accessing that directly through ClassLink. I don't really have a one-stop shop, just because curriculum does have some specific requests around how their teachers are accessing stuff. So I'm trying to navigate that, because ultimately, I apologize if you were in my session yesterday and I'm beating this horse to death, but ultimately all of this content, whether it's publisher content, whether it's created in the district and it's in Safari Montage, wherever it's coming from, it's a learning object. It's an object that I need to be able to connect to a standard so that then I can pull metrics on student mastery after having interacted with that object, maybe even measure rigor They're doing that in Lee County, Florida. If you guys caught their presentation, it's fantastic work. I mean, yes, let's talk about how to make resource mapping, the resource file easier, better. But the ultimate end game is to really measure student mastery after they've interacted with an object.
So the goal in mind, the big goal
Yes,
is that linking it back to that. But this is a step in the process.
it's a step in the process.
Fantastic. Anybody else have questions or comments, thoughts on the topic?
For all the brain power that's up front, the question to ask would be, in a perfect world, what would be your ideal methodology for not only just rostering, but for the data feed to come back to you?
I'll take the first swat at it. So as a product person, somebody that works in the creation of products, and I always tell the folks that are working on these teams that to remember, whatever you're conceiving of, you'll never be the only product in a classroom, right? You're never going to be that one thing. But I was shocked during the pandemic to helping my granddaughter in first grade, when she brought her Chromebook home, and I went and logged on and found the password for the device that was new to her, and then the password for the portal, which is new to her. And then we got into the portal, and she's in a dual language school. And so, all these things, these hurdles, but then the lists of products and the way to access them, even within the portal, was mind numbing. Absolutely mind numbing. And I've been doing this for 30 years. I had no concept from the first grade perspective, because that's the first time they opened the whole doors and we had all of it in the house, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is absolutely crazy. So for me, I would say there's absolutely, if you're going to provide digital resources in the K-12 space, we do need to work as vendors towards the standards that says, hey, we're going to all provide information about resources the same. We're going to all align to CASE or whatever, so that districts can look at all their products through a standards lens and pull data back on the standards lens. I think that's something that's not even really happening right now. We internally line our products to standards and we report out on those. And we're working on extending that reporting to other services. But the idea that we'd all be aligning, and I know Texas is requiring alignment to CASE, and there are a lot of people that are moving in this direction. But I definitely think that's the next step we're not going to buy you unless you're doing this. Now, hopefully everybody won't decide that we should do something different, but if we could all decide on that, I think that would be awesome.
That is brilliant. I mean, that's what I was really saying is using the case standard to and asking our vendors to comply with standards, OneRoster Standard, which can get better. Yeah. It needs to get a little better, a little more granular. And the case standard, you talked about all of these different ways to access content. Prior to the pandemic, I really would say that it was the wild, wild west. Yeah. I mean, our schools were buying software left and right. They were all using a different platform for collaboration and productivity. Half of my schools were using Google Classroom. The other half were using Microsoft Teams. We come into the pandemic, and as Gloria Ladson-Billing said in her keynote, it was a portal. It was a portal. And when we're coming through this portal, and we survey our parents and we say, we did this remote thing for about 4 months. How did it go? Consistently, they said, we need one way. The students need one way. It is ridiculous. I have 3 kids in the household, and they're all using 6 to 12 different ways to access content and 35 different pieces of content. They were overwhelmed, and that really drove us in our district for a standard platform. And we did go with Microsoft Teams in our district. That was huge just to make that transition. Now, I do believe that our district has an appetite for standard way to access content, for a standard method. I think curriculum is coming to that table, but we need everyone to understand that's the roadmap.
I mean, my comment to the one way, yeah, clearly that's the goal. And I think that's the ideal. We want to get there as quickly as we can. We certainly, at certain pinch points, want to simplify it to one way. Maybe there's some other stuff behind the curtains. But I think the only way to do that is to have a continuous improvement and kind of an agile mindset about it. And conversations like this make minor improvements, hopefully can contribute to minor improvements, minor adjustments. But in totality, over time, we're driving towards that. It's an onion. We'll peel it back layer at a time. I don't know if we'll ever get ultimately to the center of it, but we have to collaborate. We have to work together, whether it's together within the school district or it's, providers and consumers coming together. I mean, I know we're committed to doing that, and that's a part of our contribution to the ecosystem, but it's also, we think, contributions to success for all of us, because everybody wins when the improvements are coming out. Great question. Love the thoughts. I think we're just about done. I do want to kind of summarize a little bit. I think that there were some kind of common thoughts that have come out of this, and please contribute more if I have not captured all of them. I think, kind of in short, the resources components of the OneRoster spec have value. It's being used in some places. It's being required by some folks, and it's being used optionally by others. There's there's potential there. It is helpful, but it can do better. We can do better. We can find some new ways. One of those ways might be a simplified workflow and a way to more easily and quickly engage multiple parties within the school district, the academic side as well as the technical side, to make this work. Some of that's procedural within the district, but there's also tools that could be done to help improve that. The resources have a wide variety of applications, so it's not just the titles themselves, but it can be used for other things, languages, and greater granularity in that provisioning. And I think also around this conversation, we have to understand the goals to simplify this, to allow the personalization by class, for the teachers to do their magic. Give them the right tools behind that. So did I miss anything there? Yeah. Great. Well, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today. I think it's been a great conversation. Certainly appreciate your contributions, and hopefully you guys can watch the podcast or watch the other series in the series of podcasts. Series of the podcast comes out once a month. You can find us on all the podcast platforms. It's Perspectives Finding Common Ground. And if you have topics that you'd like to add to this forum, or you can mail them to perspectives@classlink.com, and we'll certainly see what we can do to get you involved. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening. ClassLink is proud to be the meeting place to facilitate these conversations. If you have a topic idea, send it to perspectives@classlink.com. To keep hearing our perspectives, be sure to follow us on Apple and Spotify, and subscribe to us on YouTube.